but I will do that today together with Koen Vanderhoydonck, one of our lovely members from Blanco Services. Good morning, Koen. Very much welcome.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, thank you very much, Don, and looking forward to today also.
Yeah, indeed. So indeed, you'll be moderating a panel today, which we're going to look forward to. And of course, you're a very active member, I think, of the fintech community in the Benelux, I should say, or maybe even Europe. You're based in Belgium, right? But you travel a lot.
Well, I would say traveling a lot in a digital form, yes. In a physical form, not anymore.
Yeah.
No, yeah, based out of Belgium, in a city called Leuven. So maybe all members that are
Famous
joining
university.
in with know Leuven from the Stella Artois, the beer, the brewery.
Yeah.
So yeah, very passionate about fintech. So therefore, I think it's hard with the tools of today to say it's just linked to a city, a region, a country, a Benelux, or even Europe. So you go immediately global, right? So.
Yeah, that's what you always hope, but I think it's still a challenge also in fintech. Well, already today in newspapers here, there was a lot of talk about sort of the responses to the FinCEN files that were basically released last weekend, showing all the money laundering routes, and that there's a really strong call now again for further collaboration, further harmonization, because people feel like they have to fight this battle with their hands tied behind their back. But that's definitely a topic that will appeal to you, I guess, as you're deep into
Yeah. Exactly, and it's maybe very controversial, but I am in the belief that we're over the hype cycle for RegTech, and I think there is a new kid on the block, and that new kid on the block is SupTech. It's a supervisory technology, and well, somewhere a year ago, or even a little bit more, I had to speak to a head of AML of a very large world bank, and the gentleman was saying to me like, hey, you know, Koen, I've been checking with so many fintechs and new companies. It was just so great. We saw so many nice things, and suddenly we figured out a cluster of information which was very suspicious for fraudulent actions. So he very proudly went to the CEO, being the first line, the responsible, and the CEO said, oh yeah, very great, but let me mitigate this. How can I mitigate? I don't know. It's a cluster. So they went to the regulator, where the regulator said, but here is the rule book, so you know what to do. But in fact, if you think about that idea, if you could bring data to a different level, being the regulator, which they anyway already has so much data since 2008, you have a whole new story, right? And I think that for me is the whole thing around SupTech. So it's that new collaboration ecosystem.
And so do you also then believe that it's something that needs to be more driven by governments and regulators? Because I think what you see now is that they sort of flag the issue and they push the solution very much into the market and say, you have to figure this out. But do you feel that there's also a need to bring back some responsibility towards the regulators and government perhaps to actually operate indeed the technology to solve it?
Yeah, I do think so, because since 2008, before that, we had a micro-prudential oversight by the regulator. So that was very much close in a country. And then suddenly we decided that we should take it to a higher level. So macro-prudential, the fact that the ECB is taking care of the most essential banks and things like that. But we didn't follow in 3 lines of defense model. So that is pretty much still very local. So I think that needs an update. And that means that responsibility needs to be taken by the regulator in one shape or form. And you can see already early signs. If you look at Singapore, for example, look at the MIS, they are actually already taking this responsibility in certain cases. Same thing as for China, where they're now giving certifications to RegTech companies. How great is that? I mean, I'm in a RegTech fintech company myself, Blanco, and we've been to the regulator, and they say, well, but you're not regulated. So it is that kind of vicious circle. So you somehow have to find each other, because then a bank would say, but have you been to the regulator? Yeah, we've been, but did you get a stamp? No, you never get a stamp either. So it is that kind of vicious circle that I think the industry would need to move forward or to propel in a much faster pace.
Yeah, I think so too, indeed. And especially sort of the chain responsibility is a really important factor there, because once that starts crossing borders and parties, it becomes really complex.
And that to me, then you talk DLT, right? Because then you talk blockchain. but not the technical form, but the human, the cultural form. And I think that has, for me, always been an interesting fact. Everyone was talking about the technology, but I think blockchain also made us think differently, because it's a distributed trust. And this is, for me, the new reality.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting one. But maybe first, Koen, let's talk a little bit more about Blanco, because I think Blanco's been around already for a couple of years, but deep into the RegTech space. How's it going there? And so what kind of customers are you basically seeing traction from at the moment?
Yeah. So very pleased to announce that next month, October, will be our 5th year in business. So first some celebrations. Yeah,
definitely.
Not physical, unfortunately. No. But things have been great. I mean, now we are close to 150 financial institutions on the platform, and Blanco is providing an asset management platform, and really from A to Z. So it starts always with an onboarding of your customer, where you need to do a lot of regulatory stuff like remote identification, the screening, and so on. But then it goes further, because it also allows you to do automatic contracting, digital signing, lifecycle management, up to a level where you can also do portfolio management. So you really do you manage the portfolios of your clients, you make reporting, consolidated reporting. We even go as far done that we do a kind of a PSD2 trick, but not on cash, because that's a well-known thing. It's regulated, but we do that for investments. So we already connect today with about 45 different banks. We get the data in, we clean it, we cleanse it, and it's available for our customers. So, no, it has been a great ride. Somehow also been scared with COVID, I think, in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because it happened, and then like, what's this? I mean, 5 years or almost 5 years, still a young company. And so you make like scenarios, how would it turn out? And we saw actually that after month 1 that the business was really good for us. So we're now above the original targets that we set in 2020. So business is really booming at the moment.
Yeah, that's really nice. So I just wanted to ask you about the sort of getting access to the data on asset management, because that's not regulated by PSD2. So that means that you have to do one-on-one negotiations with probably the banks that you want to get the information from, right?
Yeah, that's right. And since we now are in kind of a fintech audience, we know that banks in the very beginning, when open banking came, there was a certain level of resistance. I think that has been linged away now, because people are seeing opportunities rather than blockers. But in the investment world, this is still sometimes the case, where they say, well, but we are the private bank, so it is with us.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's a collaboration between our clients, often the family offices, the IFAs, so the independent financial advisors, that together we go to them and say, well, please, we don't want to take clients away. We want to serve them better, but they're still clients of your bank. I mean, they come to you because there is that trust for the bank.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. I think, and it's well understood, right? So, but I think at the same time, to me at least, what open banking really means is that also as a customer, I really get more control over my own data and can make it useful in other services that I'd like to use that are just not being offered by the institution that currently has the data. And that's, I think, what it's supposed to do. But indeed, I also still understand that it's quite a cultural shift from where we're coming from, where the bank felt a responsibility to protect the customer from everything outside, up to preventing foolish decisions on his own end. So that's quite a big step if you actually want to let it go and give more control away.
Yeah, but it's a two-sided, right? Because it's not just giving that idea away that the customer can go everywhere, because the fact that the customer has trust in the bank is still a very valid point, and that has never changed. But I think it's more the fundamental trust, and the trust that you also allow others to come in the ecosystem to serve you better.
Yep.
It's also a level of trust, in my opinion.
No, true. I believe so too. But you're doing a good job there with Blanco. And so, what are the steps there? Where do you see the biggest potential now for you to grow? I mean, or would you even go, as you were saying, would you also expand to subtech from your angle?
Well, if the regulator would knock on our door, then definitely interested. No, I think where we see the biggest potential for us to go is Well, we started heavily in the Netherlands. That's the home turf. I'm Belgium based. I'm Belgium myself, so we now have also a good stake in the Belgian markets.
Okay.
We recently also confirmed our presence also in Luxembourg. Now we have several customers in Luxembourg, so we're pretty much on that scaling now, and the scaling not only in the Benelux but also in Germany, in France, in Hungary. We even have talks with people in Singapore. So it's really that moment where we are starting to go out of the comfort zone and go wider into the world, if you want.
Okay, cool. And so where do you see that? Where's the where do you want to focus on? I mean, because it's pretty hard to deal with the whole world.
Yeah, sure.
Is there a particular area that
we
you're mostly interested in to extend now further? I can imagine that, for example, Luxembourg has a lot of asset managers, that there's still also quite some work to do to bring them all in.
Yeah, so Luxembourg is definitely on the radar. So is Belgium. So is our home country. So always Benelux, we see it as the home market.
Yep.
And a strong focus nowadays on Germany and France.
Okay. Yeah.
And Germany, I would also say Austria, because the two goes hand in hand almost.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Although culturally different, but from a language point of view, it's easy. We also have a German German employee or a colleague.
Yeah.
So together with me, we are really heavily in the market at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that's quite interesting. There's quite some, let's say, going to the German market is very often a natural step for a lot of Dutch companies in any case, but probably also for Belgian companies. It's like one of the biggest markets close by, relatively familiar. But it's not always that easy to get that off the ground, I think, because the cultural differences are quite broad.
Yeah. And du musst Deutsch reden. You have to speak German.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's so important. And luckily now we are a couple of people that really are very fluent in German. So that works out very well. I myself have been working in Germany quite some years. I had also a team in Germany, Frankfurt. So I'm actually familiar, but it is also a different way of doing business. The way that the human relations are slightly different than they are in Belgium, and different than in the Netherlands also. So it's also that adaptation to their local flavor, if you want.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. And that's quite tough, but you have to indeed adapt, which I think is especially the larger the country is. I think the more you have to be aware of the local culture and adapt to that to a certain extent.
You're right.
From the small countries are much more used to try and play along with the big ones by adapting, right?
Yeah. Yesterday I had a nice conversation with a Swedish guy, and we were talking about that notion where, in last 10 years we were all thinking, let's go global, everything needs to be global. But I think nowadays it's just so confirmed that everything is still local. So we are in a global world, which is a different world. It is you have a lot of notion of being very huge and big, but still we are very tight on our local behaviors. And this is you need to adapt to this.
And that's quite a tough one. And that's also where probably Europeans still are disadvantaged compared to our US colleagues who can genuinely believe that behind the US everything is one world basically, because they just don't have a clue. So, but the US itself already is fairly simple to be easily seen as one market. Although of course from state to state you also have some differences, but much more unified than it is in Europe. And I think that's the fact that you have to sort of fight your way into 28 or 27 countries these days, one by one. That's of course still quite a big hurdle for growth.
No, absolutely. So, and regulators there is a lot of sugarcoating, right, or gold plating, whatever you want to call it, in different countries. Yeah, and that makes it very easy, very difficult, to be honest, because you always need to adapt a little bit to the country. It's fair to say that maybe 95% is the same, but then that last 5% is not. So you cannot just lift and shift from one country to another. Never.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of adaptations, for example, when you look at your platform to comply with local regulations?
Well, not a lot, but you do. Like to give you an example, in Belgium, if you think about MiFID suitability, well done. If you want to invest, you need to be suitable to take that investment product. So they'll look at what is your current state in terms of financial balance. They look at your risk appetite, but they also look at your knowledge and experience. And in Belgium, for example, you have to prove that you have knowledge about a product. And if you cannot prove that you know an equity, a bond, or whatever, you cannot invest, even not if the investor or the asset manager is doing that discretionary, so for you. So you need to run a test, and you need to really pass the test, which I understand, because from the regulator's point of view, they say it's the responsibility of the asset manager to teach you that you know about the product, so that the service that is provided is in a higher level. But to my knowledge, it's the only country in the whole Europe that's doing it like this. So you need to adapt the whole boarding to that also.
Yeah,
and that's the type of flexibility, right?
No, yeah, and that can be definitely cumbersome. Because, for example, also the way that you need to deliver your proof can be quite different from country to country, right? So that's also
exactly. Yeah, remote identification in Germany is still with a paper that you print off and go to the post office to show your face.
Yeah.
So to give you examples, and I think that's why I feel so sorry about everyone that suffered from COVID, of course. But I think also COVID was actually an accelerator to this extent, because there was no physical contact, right? So you had to move on and you had to rethink everything. So my guess would be that regulations will follow and probably will be more aligned to this complete digital or phygital experience.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's actually a nice bridge also to the theme of today, the digital transformation, right? So what we're going to talk about in your panel later on. So I think it's So what do you see happening there? So I think it's definitely interesting also to talk about how the regulators are going to be going through a digital transformation themselves, right?
Indeed. And we tried to have the regulator in the panel. We had some good conversations with people from the MIS, but unfortunately it didn't work out. But I'm very excited for the panel this afternoon, because it is something that concerns us all. It's not just the fintechs, it's not only the incumbent banks, it's everyone that nowadays is actually hooked up with that idea. I need to transform, I need to become more digital. And therefore very pleased to have also a very interesting audience in there with some fintechs, Jan from Tink, for example. I mean, a very knowledgeable guy that has great insights. I mean, definitely if you talk to him, it's always a global view. It's not just one country. So I'm very curious to hear what he thinks and how he sees in digital transformation in a young company, where you basically have the opportunity to start things from scratch and make decisions from the early moment. Then we got Harry from the Rabobank, also a very senior and well-known person. And I just heard that he's not only joining my panel, but he will be there in other panels too.
Yeah, he's currently running Rabo Frontier Ventures, looking at agri fintech investments, agri-tech and fintech. But indeed, he's been around in the field of fintech already, I think, since 2012. So really early on, he picked up on the trend, and from a Rabobank perspective, looked at what fintech had to offer. So that's it's definitely nice to have him on board, and also look at how a bank like Rabobank is responding to all these changes outside. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we have Carlijn, who works at Accenture. So I always like that as well, because those people, they see a lot of people. They never see the back of their mouth, because it's always what they get as information from the customers, so the banks. But it gives at least that horizontal approach. I like that a lot. And then last but not least, we have Bonnie. Bonnie is now working in a pharmaceutical company. But she worked together with me at Euroclear, where we were actually together and some other people leading the digital transformation at Euroclear. And she's from Hong Kong originally, but she has a master in digital transformation. So she has done some studies around it and brought that into practice into different companies. And what I like particularly very much about having her on board was the fact that now she works in the pharmaceutical business, well, there is some COVID things related to that,
Yeah.
but it's a different industry. So I'm interesting to hear from her. Like, does she see any change or difference between what we believe our niche market is, the financial industry? Is that different than somewhere else? So how are the challenges out there?
Yeah. No,
very excited about it.
definitely interesting. And so what do you see? So maybe just to already get a bit of a glimpse of what you're going to talk about, perhaps. But so do you feel like digital transformation? I think still quite some companies think that that's about technology, but implicitly it's also really about culture and people. I believe, right? So I think it's where nowadays I think everyone wants to be the platform. That's nice that you can imagine that, but I believe that I don't believe that everyone can be the platform, because we don't just need platforms. So at some point, someone needs to make a product, right?
Yeah.
But also there, it's interesting, I think, to look at those market dynamics and how you actually create a company that is able to adapt to basically to create a vision and to deliver on that vision. How do you see that, Koen?
Yeah, no, I see it exactly the same. It's a multifaceted approach, and it's not only just culture and people, but it's also the management that need to follow. It's also the tooling. It's also the product sometimes, because the way that, for example, if you have a very old, an old kind of company which is with on-premise software and still working with licenses, it's far from what is called SaaS today, right?
Yeah.
And SaaS is not only the technical application, as we talked with blockchain, but it's also the way of doing business. It's monthly fees, it's pay as you use, these type of things. So digital transformation goes really across the organization, vertically, horizontal. It's just a perfect storm that comes into your company, and you cannot stop it because you have to do it somehow.
Yeah.
And that will be definitely the discussion of this afternoon. I mean, yes, so questions like, what's the difference between digital transformation and digitalization, for example? These will be the type of answers or questions we try to find an answer for.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting, because there's a lot to talk about there, and one of the things I'm always very curious about is whether organizations really feel now that they really have to do this, or whether it's still something that they get told that it's needed, but they don't feel it yet.
Yeah, I think that is the change again from COVID. We also talk about it, how that would actually have a role, but the fact that serious banks in the world have been queuing up in COVID times at cloud providers, I think that was a very, very big sign to say that it's now the time. If the large banks like the JP Morgans and the Bank of New York, that are really global guys, when they used people in India, for example, and they realized that they didn't have a computer at home and therefore could not work at home, I think this is where people are changing. The disaster recovery plans that we all had in place do not fit the new reality.
Exactly.
So I do think there will be a lot of work on this side. And what is the solution? It's digitalization. It's that transformation, right?
Yeah. No, true. Yeah.
So you could even wonder if the regulator maybe starts pushing in this direction. I would not be surprised.
No, and I think also it would make sense actually from a perspective of better resilience to things like COVID that might happen from that perspective, and to be better prepared for distributed work and let's say, I think actually at the same time wider digital value chains. But of course, I think we have to realize that probably if you think about the places where the transformation will be the biggest, we're actually also talking about the regulators, where probably they still have to make the largest steps to keep up. So that's a challenge, I think, at the same time.
I think that's definitely a challenge for them, and the challenge is also made more heavily on their shoulders because they have a role to fulfill, right? Like everyone has in the chain, but they have a very important role. They are giving the rules of the game. So I can understand if you're on their side that it's not so easy. It's not just one day after the other and you do a digital transformation.
No, and it's definitely not, and it can also be not so rewarding as generally you can only do it wrong, right? So it's pretty hard to do it right as a regulator, but you can definitely do it wrong. And so that's I think one of the challenges they also have, which also I think increases the resistance to change at the same time. But
yeah, I think they act as a financial market infrastructure, an FMI. When I was at Euroclear, we felt the same. We did not necessarily felt the urge to be very quick. We said we need to bring stability to the market, and stability is not to make quick decisions and change them overnight, which as a fintech you can do because that's called iteration.
Yeah.
But if you're a foundation to an industry, this has to be really well thought about. It has to be consultative to the market. It needs to be done together. Yeah. So it's normal that the process is slower. So I think it will come, but it will take some time.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Koen, just for the sake of time, I'd also like to sort of look ahead at the agenda for today, because I think we've got a lot of interesting things happening also outside your panel at 1 p.m., where I'll definitely join, because I think that's really going to be an interesting discussion. I just sort of want to run through the agenda with you. So we've got a nice, for everyone who's interested in data analytics and AI and working with the cloud, they should definitely reach out to SAS, who is basically available the whole day to connect to and have a discussion with on their analytics platform, which I think is really useful because these days everyone wants to dive into AI, but having a real good understanding of which data you need and how to employ it, I think is something that they could definitely help out with and share some information on. So I think that's a good opportunity. Then Interworks is going to tell you the difference between Tableau and Excel. Excel, of course, still being, I think, one of the main resources in the financial industry to do reporting and reconciliation and God knows what. But definitely good to explore, I think, also from a perspective of having better data analytics and a better overview of what your data does in a more dynamic environment. Tableau is also an interesting thing to offer. So I think this insightful session by Interworks. Then we have MetaSite doing a session about fintech engineering and how to actually set up productivity. I think it's really interesting for parties that are keen on doing, let's say, developing new tools and figuring out how to produce that in a proper way, given also the conditions about security and privacy, for example, that you need to take into account from a fintech perspective. FinTech OS is doing a session after that on the future of SME banking. I think a really interesting one as well, where their banking platform allows companies to really rethink the way that you do banking for SMEs. And as some of our research also discovered earlier, there's really big gaps still to fill on how SMEs are being served, not just for financing, but if you think about financial products in the broader perspective. Then we have the digital transformation panel led by Koen, as we were just discussing at 1. Then we've got UiPath, well-known artificial intelligence and robotics company, talking about transformation of financial services through automation, the art of the possible. I think a really interesting talk as well on how you could actually bridge the physical paper world and the fully digital world that we hope at some point we will live in. But in the meanwhile, we're still stuck between traditional processes and modern data processes. And I think that's where they have a really interesting view on how to work with that. And then we've got from the banking scene, an afterworks Indian summer event. Well, it's actually looking outside. It's not really an Indian summer these days, but hopefully it's warm and cozy at this event that's going to talk about society banking in 2030. So this is where they will look further ahead and look at what banking has to offer somewhere in the future. That's by Rick Koekelbergs, who you probably also know, Koen, one of your fellow countrymen in Belgium. Yeah. Really nice, I think. So he has a really good view, also working hard to connect the Benelux market and on everything that's going on there. So I think, really packed program, a lot's going on. And I think especially everyone interested in digital transformation, use of data, and where the financial services might be heading in the future. there's a lot to be gotten from this program. So I'll be joining a lot of these sessions and looking forward to meet all of you there, perhaps. Anything that you're looking out to today?
Yeah, I'm actually. I'm
Besides
looking for the Indian summer event, especially everyone. A couple of years ago, we were all 2020, 2020, 2020. Now we're in 2020, and I don't hear a lot of 2030.
Yeah.
So it was the first time that I really got like somebody that I believe it's Luc Caudron, I think he's called, or maybe I've got his first name wrong. But it's interesting because he also wrote a book about it. So I'm very curious to know what he believes that 2030 will look like. So I'll definitely will be joining that session.
Oh, nice. Yeah, no, definitely looking forward to that as well. And I think already, Koen, you already shared also quite some interesting insights today on where things might be heading with regard to RegTech, SubTech, and digital transformation. So I'm also really much looking forward to your panel at 1 p.m. And for now, I think as we're running out of time, very much a lot of thanks for joining me here in the morning to kick off today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I hope you enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure, and looking forward to the rest of the day.
Yeah, no, me too. So thanks, Koen. Good luck with everything with Blanco. And
thank you very much.
To everyone listening and watching, thank you very much. And enjoy your day at Amsterdam FinTech Week. And see you all tomorrow morning.